The following is not meant to serve as medical advice. It is merely the story of my own journey and learning process. All the Unexpected, Season 2, Episode 8, Imperfection. Dear listener, thank you for joining us again. In the grand theme of motherhood and life in general, this season has been sporadic at best, but here we are with episode 8. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for staying with us. And thank you for bearing with us. So as we come up on, I suppose, what is my third Mother's Day now, this coming weekend, I've done some reflecting and I wanted to talk a little bit about expectations and perfection and all of the things that we tend to put ourselves through. And so I think from time immemorial, motherhood has been a sort of exercise in keeping up with the Joneses, right? So that, even what the people down the street were doing and what the neighbors across the way, right? There's always sort of been a sense of comparison, right? And so is that person doing better? Am I doing the right thing? Or am I making the right choices, right? But I think in the age of social media, it's hyper inflated, right? And so that we sit and we scroll, some of us more often than not, some of us more intentionally than others, right? But we're bombarded by imagery of how other people are parenting, and not only imagery, but advice and recommendations and judgment and comparisons, right? And so it becomes sort of hard to tune that out and turn it off. And so you're sort of keeping up with the proverbial Joneses of influencers, right? And I think I've become quite reflective on it, and I think it, to a certain extent, has become very damaging for the sort of mental health of everyone who's consuming it, right? And so I kind of wanted to just talk about that, and that's kind of where the genesis of today's title came from, and the idea of imperfect perfection, right? And so one of the things that has sort of been a personal campaign, if you will, in the last, I guess almost a decade now, half decade or so, has just been, living more healthful, what's the word, I suppose? Yeah, healthy, we'll go with it. And, as a result, the choices of food we make and things like that. And I've really found that the sort of internet presence of healthy choices and eating and judgment with regards to, what people are feeding kids, and the snack judgment when kids go to school, right? And all these in-betweens are very, tied into and born from a place of privilege, and so I really want to talk about being able to make those kind of choices with the reality of your life in mind, right? So, I was having a moment recently, and I, follow quite a few people who talk about food swaps and healthy things. And, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and I said, honestly, we do our best, right? And we figure out how to make the best choices for our child and my daughter, and what we do feed and we don't feed. I said, but I'm growing fatigued of seeing another influencer telling me to use, $72 worth of ingredients while she preaches from a granite, kitchen countertop and a $7,000 Sub-Zero refrigerator in the background. It's just not reflective of what most of us are working with or going through, right? And so I really just kind of want it to not seem so daunting to people, right? Because people say, okay, well, cool, that's great, but I can't afford that. That's not a reality to me that I'm using, $72 worth of ingredients and, $27 a pound almond flour to make my kid a cookie, right? It's not reasonable for most people's budget, nor the time they have in a day, right? And so I want to talk a little bit about really practical ways to make healthier choices, right? One of my favorite things recently, as it becomes sort of more commonplace for people to step away from processed foods, to reduce sugar intake, and just really simple choices that can be made, is that a lot of store brands actually have their own sort of store, generic brands of organic products. And so that's a really reasonable way to make some of those swaps. And some of the most obvious swaps would be kind of the base things that you use. So, organic plain, cane sugar in place of white sugar, organic unbleached. And so anything unbleached and unbrominated is a huge switch for gut health. A lot of the gluten issues that we see really are related to the bleaching and things that are added to just flour these days, right? So just really simple swap in that sense. If you're trying to choose organic produce, think about ones that don't have peels and have less sort of contact, or have more contact rather, with the soil, right? So that if you're choosing between, let's say, some leafy greens and a banana and an orange, and all three are really unreasonable to buy organically, then choose the leafy green and the thing that has more exposure to the soil as the organic one, and stick with the regular ones. People will give you advice of only organic meat, and I know that is a really financial impossibility for most people. So a great way to just, ensure gut health, even, when you can't buy the organic meat, is a simple probiotic. And there are a lot of different brands that people like. I'm going to do an accompanying kind of list and cheat guide on the site to go with this episode. And so all the links to kind of some of my favorite things will be available there. I think that's the easier way to do it. And even just kind of an organic probiotic yogurt, right? And so there's a couple of brands that are maybe, 50 to 70 cents more than the other, right? So kind of small concessions in the budget, right? And so I think really just being able to find what's reasonable to do for you and to not feel so overwhelmed when it comes to household products, right? People will say, well, this brand and this and this and that. Once again, a lot of the store brands these days are offering free and clear options. So swapping out a dish detergent and a laundry detergent for the free and clear option, right, is a really simple way to just kind of do a budget friendly, toxic free swap, right? So just really kind of the simplest, smallest things that you can do and have it be gradually. You don't have to replace your whole pantry. You don't have to replace everything in the bathroom overnight because it's just not practical for most people. And so I think there needs to be a trend towards practicality, right? And there needs to be a trend towards getting away from this absolutism, because I think too many people are discouraged from trying to make these swaps, right? Or trying to live a little bit less toxic and a little bit more healthy, because it's done from a place where it's preached at people and where there's so much privilege involved, right? And so I guess that kind of comes to my next point, right? I've seen so many posts recently about make me time, right? And take a night for yourself, take a weekend for yourself, going to the store by yourself or running an errand, isn't me time. Well, guess what? For some people, it is. And it can be really discouraging when you're the mom who might be working 2 jobs with a partner working 3, right? And you guys are struggling and you're trying to just tread water, and someone's telling you, well, the only way for you to really relax is, a $300 me retreat or a $75 manicure. And you're sat there thinking, well, that's my grocery budget for the next 5 days or the next week or whatever it is that you're making work. And it can feel for a lot of people like, well, I'm failing because I thought that trip to Walmart by myself today was some real nice me time. And you know what? If that was the 45 minutes you got to yourself and you listened to your favorite, foul languaged song in the car on the way home, and maybe bought a secret donut that you ate in the driveway before you went home, then congratulations, you took care of yourself in the best way that you could. And we have to give moms that space, right? And let people meet themselves where they can, right? And this over preachy self-care from a place of privilege from people who have childcare and can afford time off or, have PTO or all of the things that, frankly, these days are luxuries for a lot of people are on the internet preaching to people are so impractical and so invalidating to the person who that 30-minute shower and the time by themselves was their me care for the week, and it rejuvenated them and they did what they could. And I think we have to hold space for understanding that, yes, in an ideal world, a mom is getting her facial and her massage and her weekend to herself and brunch with the girls and all of the things that would be great for everybody to be able to do. But it's just not realistic, and it's super discouraging and super invalidating for the large number of people these days as times get tougher that are just treading water and trying to do the best that they can for themselves and their families, right? And so, I was on LinkedIn the other day and somebody was talking about, take a nap every day. And I'm like, okay, well, no. Some of us are full-time stay-at-home parents also working and have a partner that's doing the same outside of the home and a 3-year-old who just does not nap anymore. So I'm not sure, unless you're trying to, set me up for a CPS call here where I'm taking a nap for 2 hours in the middle of the day and also keeping a child safe, right? So I think from the perspective of people giving all of this advice, check your privilege just a little bit, because it's just not what everyone can do. And for the multitude out there listening to it, do what you can for yourself. It's not going to look like everybody else's ideal me time, ideal day of spa or day of self, and everything in between. And if you can do that, no one's judging you either, right? If you do have the luxury of childcare and disposable income, and that's what this is really about. So if if you do have that luxury and it looks like that for you, no one's judging you either, right? But I think that's the point, that we have to hold space for the myriad of experience, right? We have to hold space that motherhood looks different for different families in different places in different circumstances. And even for the same family, it might look very different this year than it did last, or it will next, right? And holding space for people to be able to not feel judged, not feel less than, not feel like, oh, well, I guess I'm doing that me time thing wrong, right? Or I'm doing that relaxing thing wrong. Because what is possible for one person may not be possible for the next, and vice versa. And so this idea of, the imperfect nature of life itself, right? And so, step away from the screens and the influencers and the life coaches and X, Y, and Z who are prescribing things to people without taking that difference into consideration, right? I also think about it when it comes to feeding, and this great discussion of people saying, well, this person should nurse and this person can get formula and nobody should be judging anybody, and back and forth. And it's this really sort of divisive debate, and you don't know, right? You don't know what the next person is going through. You don't know the reality. And at the end of the day, the best that we can do is support people, right? And yes, there is science to tell you certain things. There's information about best practices and what you could do in an ideal situation, right? But once again, there's very little about life that's ideal. There's very little about parenting that's ideal. And we have to be able to embrace the myriad of experience. We have to be able to be sensitive when we offer advice, when we offer wisdom and tips and things, and understand and sort of, predicate it all with the idea that this may not be possible for you, right? And holding space to give people your advice and your wisdom and your recommendations without judgment, right? And I think in general, when we talk about motherhood and we talk about raising children and the sort of just gargantuan task that it is, even in the best of circumstances, right? We have to do so without judgment, and judgment for others, right? And judgment for ourselves, right? And so there's so many scenarios where mothers are put in a position to judge themselves. I think to my NICU parents out there listening, it's really hard to approach your situation, whether the baby was in the hospital for 1 day or 109 like we were, right? It's hard to not judge oneself, right? It's hard to not say, ooh, well, what if I had? What if I hadn't? Could I have maybe? Would it have been possible, right? There's so many ifs, and there's so much opportunity to spiral into self-blame, right? And you have to remove that, right? And so when we are giving advice, right? When we are talking to parents and we're telling them, it's hard. I'll say, it's really hard sometimes. You read a post and someone's saying, well, like, don't do X, Y, and Z to a baby, lifelong trauma to their brain. Or, if you miss that first skin to skin, you're reducing, their ability to do X, Y, and Z. And for some parents, that was unavoidable, right? It's not like you didn't do these things or you put your baby through something because you wanted to, right? And it can feel very, very judgmental and very, very hard to hear when there's no caveat, right? When someone doesn't say, I know you did your best, and if this didn't happen or it wasn't perfect or it wasn't exactly the way that you saw it, that's not on you, right? And we have to be able to hold that space as people who give advice, people who post online, and people who are in this space of parenting and family and talking to people, because you have an audience that may have had an unavoidable situation that led them to doing that thing. And yeah, they probably already feel really bad about it. So try and not to make it worse, right? And also, if you're the parent on the end of getting this advice, the mom who's already felt like, oh, I failed so many things, or I made so many mistakes, or I should have done, or I could have done. Release that judgment, release that part of you that's being told that there is an ideal way or there is a perfect way to do this, and know that it is your own imperfect version of perfection, right? And that you have taken this journey and you have gone down this path and you have made the choices that you made because that's all that you could do in the time, right? And so know that in an effort to do our best, in a moment of doing our best, that we are succeeding, that we are mothering to the greatest of our abilities, and that we are raising children who will be appreciative of all that you've done and all of that you've given. And so as, we head into Mother's Day, and even just the celebration itself, maybe you've got to go to work, right? Maybe, your kid is with the other parent or whatever the situation is. And it might not be flowers and pancakes and bed and breakfasts like we see on TV and all of the perfection that it might be. Or you might, have a strained relationship. Or those that have experienced loss, right? It might just not be there for you at all. And all of that has to be held space for. And so with gentleness for yourself, with gentleness for others, with just an open heart and open mind, go forward into this space of parenting and know that doing your best is more than enough. Doing your best and wanting to do that, wanting to find perfection in your home, in your meals, in your outings, and your me time and your vacation is already winning that battle. And know that in itself, that consideration, that want and that willingness to say, how can I do my best? How can I be there as this parent is already winning, right? You have already done so much of the work. And so With that, I am wishing all of you a very happy Mother's Day in whatever way that manifests for you, even if it means that you are simply mothering yourself with self-care. And if that self-care is a 5-minute shower that's warm and maybe not so hot because the kids have used all the water or whatever it is, take that time. Know that that is your way and your moment of slightly imperfect perfection. Thank you all. Have a wonderful week in love and light. As always, you can find us on our website at alltheunexpected, one word, alltheunexpected.com, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even Pinterest these days at All the Unexpected. I always look forward to hearing feedback, and thank you all in love and light.